He was the most feared man in the city, a mafia boss whose name could end careers, erase families, and silence entire streets with a single glance. But there was one thing no one knew. For 37 years, Vincent Torino had lived in total silence. No music, no screams, no last words from the people who died because of him. That morning, in a locked room at the top of his mansion, a woman knelt in front of him. She was just a maid, invisible, replaceable. And yet, her hands were shaking as she stared at his ear. What she pulled out was small, almost meaningless, until the world exploded. Vincent heard his own breath for the first time, the ticking of a clock, the sound of fear in the room. And in that single moment, he realized something far more terrifying than the miracle itself. If his hearing could be restored so easily, then someone had been lying to him his entire life. And Vincent Torino never forgave lies. No one knew Vincent Torino was deaf. Not the men who trembled when he entered a room, not the rivals who begged for mercy with broken voices, not even the doctors who had examined him since childhood and declared with clinical certainty that his condition was irreversible. They believed his silence was strategy. Only Vincent knew it was a sentence handed down at birth. For 37 years, he had ruled a city he could not hear. Power, for him, had never lived in sound. It lived in eyes that darted away too quickly, in lips that tightened before a lie, in the faint tremor of hands resting on polished tables. While others listened, Vincent observed. While others shouted, he calculated. His empire had been built not despite his silence, but because of it. That morning began like countless others. The city sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, obedient and unaware. Vincent sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing financial reports with mechanical precision, his gaze drifting between lines of numbers and the men standing across from him. He watched their mouths move, cataloged their expressions, measured their loyalty in micro-expressions, too small for fear to hide. The room was quiet, exactly the way he preferred it. Then the door opened. The new maid stepped inside. Vincent noticed her immediately, and not for the reasons men usually noticed women. Maria Santos did not bow her head low enough to signal submission, yet she did not lift her chin in defiance either. She moved with calm deliberation, not the jittery obedience of someone afraid of making a mistake. Her hands were steady as she crossed the room, her posture respectful but unafraid. It was subtle, but Vincent felt it at once. This woman did not move like prey. He returned to his reports, maintaining the illusion of indifference while tracking her through the edges of his vision. She cleaned with care, dusting shelves that held books he had never read, polishing glass that reflected a life few were allowed to see. Everything about her said temporary, and yet something about her presence unsettled the careful balance of the room. Then she stopped. Vincent sensed it before he saw it. The shift in air, the pause where motion should have been. He looked up. Maria was staring at him, not at his face, at his right ear. The room tightened. No one stared at Vincent Torino. No one examined him as though he were unfinished, flawed, or in need of correction. His fingers moved slightly toward the drawer beneath his desk, not in panic, but in instinct. Men had died for less. Maria seemed to realize what she was doing and took a breath, steadying herself. Her eyes softened, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous concern. She took a step closer, then another. Vincent's jaw tightened. He was already calculating how quietly she would disappear, how efficiently the disruption would be erased. He had done it before. He could do it again. But then she spoke. Her lips formed words he could not hear, yet somehow felt, as though the air itself carried their weight. Slowly, carefully, she said something that should not exist in his world. "You are not deaf from birth." The sentence struck harder than any bullet. Vincent froze. For the first time in decades, his mind failed to assemble a response. He searched her face for mockery, for manipulation, for the greed that usually followed proximity to power. There was none, only uncertainty, and beneath it, a quiet resolve. That sentence unraveled everything. If she was wrong, she would die. If she was right, the world Vincent understood would collapse. Maria lifted her hand, hesitating inches from his face. Her fingers trembled, not with fear of him, but with the gravity of what she was about to do. She looked into his eyes, silently asking permission she had no right to request. Vincent Torino had never trusted anyone. Trust was a luxury men like him could not afford. His life had been built on control, and control demanded certainty. Yet in that moment, certainty abandoned him. He could end this now. A single gesture would restore order, restore silence, restore the lie he had lived inside for nearly 4 decades. The city would keep turning. His empire would remain intact. Instead, Vincent nodded. The smallest movement? Barely noticeable. And yet it was the most dangerous decision he had ever made. Maria's fingers touched his ear with a gentleness that startled him. Not the cold efficiency of doctors, not the invasive probing he remembered from childhood, but something careful, almost reverent. Vincent felt a familiar pressure, a dull presence he had never questioned because it had always been there. But now, that presence shifted. Time slowed. Maria adjusted her angle, her brow furrowing in concentration. Vincent felt a strange sensation deep within his ear, a resistance giving way, as though something long forgotten was being pulled back into the light. His heart began to pound, not with fear, but with a fragile, terrifying hope he had buried years ago. Then it happened. A small, dark object emerged into Maria's palm. It was insignificant, waxed, ugly, ordinary, and yet it held 37 years of stolen life. The rush hit him like a wave. Air moved through passages that had been sealed since childhood. His head spun as something alien flooded his senses. Vincent's hand flew to the edge of the desk as he struggled to stay upright. And then he heard it. His own breath. It was loud, jagged, real. Not a concept, not a vibration, but a sound that filled the room with undeniable presence. Vincent's eyes widened as the world cracked open. The faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner thundered through his skull. The soft scrape of Maria's shoes against marble rang like a confession. Sound hurt? Sound overwhelmed? Sound was alive. Maria stepped back, tears spilling down her face as she watched him unravel. She understood, perhaps better than he did, what this moment meant. Not just hearing, not just a miracle, but a truth too large to ignore. Vincent struggled to speak. When his voice finally emerged, it was broken, untrained, unfamiliar even to himself. The sound of it shook him more than the gunshots he had never heard. In the chaos of sensation, one thought cut through everything else with chilling clarity. If this could be fixed so easily, then someone had lied to him. Not once, not accidentally, but deliberately. As Vincent Torino sat in his chair, drowning in a world that had suddenly found its voice, the foundation of his empire shifted. Power no longer felt absolute. Silence no longer protected him. And the woman standing before him, this Maid, this stranger, had just become the most dangerous person in his life, because she had given him sound. And with it, the truth. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The room did not return to silence. It couldn't. Sound clung to Vincent Torino like a second skin, impossible to peel away. It pressed against him from every direction, sharp, intrusive, alive. Each breath he took announced itself loudly in his chest. Each swallow echoed in his ears as though his body were betraying him by revealing its smallest movements. For a man who had spent his entire life mastering stillness, the noise was unbearable. He closed his eyes. But that only made it worse. Without sight to anchor him, sound expanded, stretching into places he had never learned to control. The ticking clock stabbed at his concentration. The faint hum of electricity behind the walls vibrated like a warning. Even the soft rustle of Maria's dress as she shifted her weight felt indecently loud, as if she were standing too close. Vincent lifted one hand, palm facing outward. Stop. Maria froze instantly. Her instincts were good. She had known when to step forward, and now she knew when to step back. She stood still near the window, the light catching the tears on her lashes. Her fingers clenched around the small object in her hand, as though it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Vincent opened his eyes slowly. The city outside his window looked the same as it always had: cold, vast, obedient. But he felt different inside it. Smaller, stripped. He hated that sensation more than anything. Put it down, he said. His own voice startled him again. It sounded rough, unpolished, unfamiliar. Not the commanding instrument he had imagined in his mind for decades, but something raw and human. Maria obeyed at once, placing the object carefully on the edge of his desk. As if it were evidence in a trial neither of them had agreed to attend. Neither spoke. Vincent needed time. Time to build walls where none existed anymore. Time to understand the weapon that had been placed in his hands without his consent. He focused on Maria, studying her the way he studied everything that entered his world, with precision, with caution, with the cold awareness that nothing was ever accidental. She stood straight, though her shoulders were tense. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. He could hear it now, the faint hitch she tried and failed to suppress. Fear. Yes, but not for herself alone. There was something else threaded through it. Regret, perhaps, or the dawning realization that saving a powerful man was not always an act of mercy. "You should not have done that," Vincent said quietly. Maria met his gaze. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I know." That answer intrigued him more than any apology could have. She did not defend herself. She did not beg. She did not pretend ignorance. She simply acknowledged the truth and accepted whatever consequence might follow. That was not the behavior of someone chasing reward. Then why, Vincent asked. Maria hesitated. He heard the pause before she spoke, the way her breath caught as though she were choosing each word with care. "Because I've seen this before," she said softly. "Because sometimes silence isn't fate. It's neglect. Or convenience. Or someone else's decision made for you." Her words landed heavily. Vincent turned his attention back to the desk, to the object resting there so innocently. Such a small thing. Such devastating reach. He thought of the years he had spent reading lips in sterile offices, watching doctors shake their heads with sympathetic certainty. He remembered his father's hand on his shoulder, firm, reassuring, final. This is how it is. Accept it. Acceptance had shaped him, hardened him, made him untouchable. And now it felt like a lie. "You recognized it immediately," Vincent said. It was not a question. Maria nodded. "My mother, she said..." They told her the same thing, that it couldn't be fixed, that she should learn to live with it. Her fingers curled unconsciously, as though remembering something painful. She lost years, conversations, laughter. By the time someone noticed what others had missed, it was too late to get everything back. Vincent listened, really listened, not to the words alone, but to the emotion behind them. There was no calculation in her voice, no attempt to sway him, only memory. "And you decided to risk your life for mine," he said. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I decided not to walk away this time." The honesty unsettled him more than fear ever had. Vincent rose slowly from his chair. His legs were unsteady, his balance uncertain, but he refused to show it. Control, even fractured, was still control. The sound of the leather chair shifting behind him grated against his nerves, but he endured it. He crossed the room, each step announcing itself too loudly, stopping a careful distance from Maria. Up close, she smelled faintly of soap and something warmer beneath it. Not perfume, something real. He had never noticed such details before, or perhaps he had, but never allowed them to matter. "You will say nothing about this," Vincent said. "To anyone." Maria nodded immediately. "I never intended to." He believed her. That realization irritated him. "I will have you examined," he continued. "Not by my doctors. New ones. Discreet ones." His jaw tightened. If what you believe is true, then there are questions that demand answers. Dangerous questions. Maria understood that too. He saw it in the way her spine straightened, in the way she lifted her chin just slightly. "And if it is true," she asked carefully, "what happens to the people who lied to you?" Vincent did not answer right away. The silence between them, real silence this time, felt heavier than any sound. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. That was far more frightening than anger. "Then they will learn," he said, "what it means to take something from me." Maria swallowed. He heard it. The fear she could no longer hide. Yet she did not step away. Instead, she said, "You're overwhelmed. You should sit down." The audacity of it should have enraged him. Instead, Vincent did something that shocked them both. He sat, not because she told him to, but because, for the first time in his life, someone had seen his weakness and spoken to it without trying to exploit it. Maria moved closer, slower now, careful not to startle him. She spoke quietly, explaining what he was feeling, what his body was doing, how the world would eventually soften if he allowed it. He listened. And as the city continued to hum outside his windows, Vincent Torino realized that regaining sound was not the most dangerous change taking place. It was the fact that this woman, this unassuming, brave, foolish woman, had become the first person in his life he did not want to silence. The city did not wait for Vincent Torino to adjust. It never had. Beyond the glass walls of his study, traffic moved in restless currents, horns flaring and fading, voices rising and colliding in ways that made his temples throb. The world was loud, impatient, unapologetic, and now, for the first time, it demanded his attention all at once. Vincent stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, forcing himself to remain still as sound pressed into him like an invading force. Behind him, Maria remained quiet. He could hear her breathing even when she tried to soften it, could sense the careful distance she kept, as though any sudden movement might shatter the fragile calm. She was learning him. He realized, the way one learns an injured animal slowly, respectfully, without assuming trust. That irritated him. No one learned Vincent Torino. People survived him, obeyed him, feared him, but they did not learn him. "You should leave," he said without turning around. Maria stiffened. He heard it in the way her breath caught, in the faint scrape of her shoe against the marble floor. But she did not move toward the door. "You don't mean that," she said. Vincent turned. Her audacity was no longer surprising. It was becoming dangerous. "Do not confuse restraint with permission," he said calmly. "I'm not," Maria replied. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight now that he could hear it fully. "I'm recognizing shock when I see it." Shock. The word cut deeper than accusation ever could. Vincent crossed the room, stopping just short of her space. Up close, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled and uncurled at her sides. She was afraid. Anyone would be. But she hadn't retreated. That alone set her apart. "You think you understand what you've done," he said. "But you don't." Maria met his gaze. "Then tell me." For a moment, Vincent considered ordering her out, ending this conversation before it dug deeper than he could afford. But something inside him resisted the instinct. Sound had already stripped him bare. Perhaps words would do the same. "They taught me silence," he said finally. "From the beginning. They told me it was permanent, unchangeable. I learned to rule within that limitation." His jaw tightened. "Now you're telling me it was never necessary." Maria's eyes softened, and that softness unsettled him more than fear. "I'm telling you that someone benefited from you believing it was," she said. The implication settled between them, heavy and unavoidable. Vincent felt anger stir, not the sharp, explosive kind, but something colder, calculated. If this was deception, it was not random. Someone had chosen this for him, someone he had trusted. "You will stay," he said. Maria blinked. "I thought you wanted me to leave. I've changed my mind." That was all the explanation she would get. The next hours unfolded with uneasy quiet. Vincent summoned no one. He did not return calls. For the first time in years, his empire waited while he sat in a dimmed room, listening to sounds he had never known. The clock, the distant sirens, the whisper of curtains moving with the air, each sound chipped away at the walls he had built inside himself. Maria prepared tea he did not drink, then simply sat across from him, her presence steady, grounding. She spoke only when necessary, explaining what his body was experiencing, how his senses would recalibrate, how the world would eventually stop shouting at him. "You sound like a doctor," Vincent said dryly. She smiled faintly. "I'm not. I just learned to pay attention when others didn't." That sentence lingered. By evening, Vincent's phone rang. He stared at it as it vibrated against the desk, the sound sharp and intrusive. He had watched phones ring his entire life without hearing them. Now the noise felt like a demand, an intrusion into a space that had once been inviolable. He answered. Marco's voice filled the room, deep and familiar in ways Vincent had never experienced before. There was confidence there, loyalty, and beneath it, something else, hesitation. A pause before certain words, a subtle tightening when questions turned too close to sensitive ground. Vincent listened. For the first time, he heard doubt. He ended the call sooner than usual, his expression unreadable. Maria watched him carefully, reading what she could from his face, now aware that silence no longer hid everything from him. "You heard something you didn't like," she said. "I heard something I've been missing," Vincent corrected. Night fell slowly, the city lights flickering on like a constellation he had ruled from the shadows. Vincent stood at the window again, absorbing the distant roar of life below. Sound gave everything dimension. Texture. Truth. And truth was dangerous. "Someone made a choice for me," he said quietly. "They decided what I could hear, what I could know." Maria joined him at the window, careful not to stand too close. "And now you're going to take that choice back." He looked at her then, really looked at her, not as a servant, not as an anomaly, but as the woman who had undone him without asking for anything in return. "You have placed yourself in a very precarious position," Vincent said. People will notice that you matter to me. Maria did not flinch. Do I? The question caught him off guard. Vincent considered the truth, unfiltered by strategy or fear. He considered the fact that she had not run when she could have, that she spoke to him without trembling now, that her presence softened the world just enough to make it bearable. Yes, he said. The admission hung between them, fragile and irrevocable. That night, as the city pulsed with sound and secrets, Vincent Torino made his first move not against his enemies, but against the past itself. And Maria Santos, standing beside him, understood that the most dangerous thing she had uncovered was not his hearing, it was his heart. The first threat did not arrive with gunfire or shouted warnings. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. Vincent noticed it in the pause before a guard answered him, a hesitation so brief it would have meant nothing before. Now it rang loud in his awareness, a fracture in the rhythm he had memorized over years of control. Sound had given him a new sense, and with it, a cruel clarity. Loyalty, he realized, had always had a voice. He had simply never heard it waver. Maria sensed the change in him before he spoke. She had learned to read tension not from volume, but from stillness. Vincent stood at the edge of his office, phone lowered, his expression composed in a way that meant something underneath was already moving. They know, she said softly. Vincent did not ask who. Not everything, he replied. But enough. Words spread quickly in worlds built on whispers. The staff noticed how often Maria was summoned to his presence, how she was never reprimanded for lingering, how Vincent's gaze followed her when he believed no one was watching. Curiosity turned to suspicion, suspicion to calculation. In a house like this, information was currency, and Maria had become expensive. That evening, Vincent ordered dinner served in his private dining room. No guests, no advisors, just the two of them and a table too large for its purpose. The clink of cutlery startled him at first, but he masked it well, focusing instead on Maria across from him. She ate little, her attention divided between him and the quiet tension thickening the air. You should move to another wing, Vincent said, as if commenting on the weather. Maria looked up. Why? Because someone will test how far my protection extends. Her fork stilled. And does it? The question was dangerous, honest, necessary. Vincent met her gaze without hesitation, farther than they expect. She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of it. Protection from Vincent Torino was absolute, but it was also a mark. To be under his guard was to be under constant scrutiny. Maria understood the trade, and the understanding sat heavy in her chest. That night, she did not sleep. Neither did Vincent. Sound had taught him a new cruelty secrets made noise. He heard them in the hushed conversations outside closed doors, in footsteps that slowed near Maria's room, in the subtle shift of tone when her name was mentioned. His world was no longer silent, and that made deception far harder to tolerate. By morning, the test came. A tray shattered in the corridor outside Maria's new quarters, porcelain breaking too cleanly to be an accident. Vincent arrived before anyone else, his footsteps sharp and deliberate. He took in the scene instantly, the startled maid, the guard standing too far back, the way Maria's shoulders were squared despite the pale tightness of her face. Leave us, Vincent said. No one argued. When the corridor emptied, Vincent turned to Maria. Did they touch you? No, she said. They wanted to see if you would come. He exhaled slowly. That, at least, confirmed his suspicions. This was not an attack. It was a probe. They will push harder next time, Vincent said. And they will not aim at you directly. Maria frowned. Then who? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Me. Later that day, Vincent summoned Marco. He listened this time not just to the words spoken, but to the spaces between them. Marco spoke of shipments and numbers, of territories and minor disputes, but his voice carried strain now, an edge of unease Vincent had never detected before. When Vincent mentioned Maria casually, Marco's response came a fraction too quickly. I'll make sure the staff remembers their place, Marco said. Vincent smiled faintly. See that you do. After Marco left, Vincent remained seated, fingers steepled, listening to the quiet aftermath of betrayal settling into place. He did not act immediately. He never did. Sound had not made him reckless. It had made him precise. That evening, Maria found him on the terrace overlooking the city. The wind carried distant sirens and laughter, fragments of lives moving on without regard for the war beginning behind closed doors. Vincent stood close to the railing, his presence steady, but she could hear the tension in his breathing now, the restrained violence of it. You're planning something, she said. Yes, For them, she added. For anyone who believes you are expendable. The words sent a chill through her. Maria stepped closer, drawn by an instinct she no longer questioned. This isn't just about control anymore, she said. Is it? Vincent turned to her, the city lights casting sharp lines across his face. No, he admitted. It's about choice. He reached out then, hesitating only a moment before his fingers brushed her wrist. The contact was light, almost cautious, as though he were testing the reality of it. Maria did not pull away. The warmth of her skin grounded him, softened the relentless noise of the world just enough to breathe. You changed everything, he said quietly. So did you, she replied. The admission settled between them, intimate and irrevocable. Whatever they were becoming, it could not exist in half measures. That night, Vincent gave a single order, quiet, surgical, effective. One man was reassigned, another removed from influence, a third sent away under the guise of promotion. No blood was spilled, but the message echoed through the house louder than any gunshot. Maria was untouchable. As the city slept, Vincent stood alone once more, listening to the distant hum of power shifting back into alignment. Silence had once protected him. Now, it was sound, and the woman who had taught him how to hear that made him dangerous. And somewhere in the mansion, someone realized too late that provoking a man who had just found his voice was the gravest mistake they could have made. By the 5th day, Vincent Torino understood something no doctor could have warned him about. Hearing was not a gift. It was exposure. Sound did not merely enter his world, it demanded responses. Every footstep carried intention. Every breath revealed nerves or confidence. Every pause between words betrayed thought. The city he had ruled from silence now spoke to him in layers, and not all of them were loyal. He sat in the backseat of his car as it moved through the city, hands folded neatly, eyes forward. Outside, horns blared, engines roared, voices collided in overlapping chaos. Before, he had watched the city like a chessboard. Now he felt it like a living organism, restless and hungry. It unsettled him in ways he refused to show. Across from him, Maria sat quietly. She had been reluctant to leave the mansion, even under his escort. But Vincent insisted. Visibility was protection for now. Let them see her beside him. Let them understand that touching her meant challenging him directly. It was a calculated risk, one he would not have taken a week ago. Does it still hurt? Maria asked softly. Vincent glanced at her, surprised by the question. He considered the constant pressure in his head, the way sound still pressed too close some moments, retreated others. He considered the way his chest tightened whenever a noise caught him off guard. Yes, he said, but I'm adapting. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. You don't have to pretend with me. He studied her for a moment, then looked away. Pretending had kept him alive. Unlearning it felt dangerous. At the restaurant, the test came quickly. The maitre d' greeted Vincent with flawless politeness, but his voice pitched slightly higher when his gaze flicked to Maria. Vincent heard it, heard the calculation beneath the courtesy. He heard it again when a waiter lingered too long near their table, when a man at the bar spoke Vincent's name just a little too softly. Maria sensed the shift. Her posture straightened, her hand tightening around her glass. They're watching, she murmured. Vincent leaned closer, his voice low. Let them. Dinner unfolded under scrutiny. Vincent spoke little, listening instead, cataloging every sound. Laughter from nearby tables rang false. Cutlery scraped too loudly when certain names were mentioned. Someone was nervous. Someone was planning. Then Maria excused herself. Vincent's attention sharpened instantly. He listened to her footsteps fade. Then stop. Too long. A voice followed male, unfamiliar, lowered into what it assumed was privacy. Vincent was on his feet before conscious thought caught up. Chairs scraped, a few startled gasps sounded, but he ignored them all, following the sound that mattered. He reached the corridor just as Maria stepped back. Her expression controlled, but her pulse loud in Vincent's ears. The man blocking her path smiled thinly. No harm meant, he said. Just curious? Vincent stepped into view. The silence that followed was profound. You should leave, Vincent said calmly. The man swallowed. Vincent heard it. Fear always had a sound. He stepped aside without argument and disappeared into the crowd. Vincent turned to Maria, scanning her quickly. Did he touch you? No, she said. He wanted to see if I was alone. Vincent nodded once. That confirmed it. The probing had escalated. They left immediately. Back in the car, Maria stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. This is getting worse, she said quietly. Because of me? No, Vincent replied. Because of what you represent. She turned to him. Which is a variable, he said. And variables frighten people who depend on control. She considered that. You're talking about yourself too. Vincent did not deny it. That night, he did not send Maria back to her wing. Instead, he had a room prepared adjacent to his own. The decision was strategic. He told himself, proximity meant protection. Nothing more. Yet when she stood in the doorway, hesitating, something in his chest tightened. You don't have to stay, she said. Yes, he replied. You do. She searched his face, then nodded. Then so do you. The audacity of it almost drew a smile from him. Later, as the mansion settled into uneasy quiet, Vincent lay awake, listening. He heard guards pacing, their boots echoing down corridors. He heard distant conversations cut short when he passed. He heard the house adjusting to a new reality. And he heard Maria. Her breathing through the thin wall was steady, slower now, the sound of someone trying to sleep in a place that did not yet feel safe. Vincent found himself listening to it longer than necessary, grounding himself in the quiet rhythm of it. Sound, he realized, could be comfort as much as threat. By dawn, his phone rang. This time, he was ready. The voice on the other end was familiar, respectful, and wrong. Vincent heard the lie before the words were finished. He ended the call without explanation and rose from the bed, already issuing silent orders in his mind. Someone had moved without permission. Someone had mistaken his adjustment for weakness. He stood at the window as the sun rose, bathing the city in pale gold. Maria appeared beside him, drawn by instinct more than noise. She did not ask what had happened. She did not need to. You're angry, she said. Yes. She waited. And afraid. He added quietly. The admission surprised them both. Maria reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. The contact was small, but it cut through the noise like nothing else could. Vincent did not pull away. Then listen to that feeling. She said, before it decides for you. Vincent closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the warmth, the sound of her voice, the truth in it. Then he opened them again, the calculation returning, sharper than ever. I will, he said, and so will they. Because someone had made a fatal miscalculation. They had believed that giving Vincent Torino his hearing would make him vulnerable. They were about to learn that it had only made him more dangerous, and that the woman who stood beside him was no longer a weakness, but a line no one could cross without consequence. Vincent Torino had always believed anger was loud. He was wrong. True anger moved in silence, precise and deliberate, slipping through cracks before anyone realized the walls were already falling. In the days following the incident at the restaurant, Vincent did not raise his voice, did not issue visible punishments, did not alter his routines in ways that would alarm those watching him. Instead, he listened. He listened to phone calls that lingered a second too long, to footsteps that hesitated outside certain doors, to voices that softened when his name was spoken, as if careful not to wake something dangerous. Sound had turned his world transparent. Maria felt the shift as clearly as he did. The mansion no longer felt merely tense. It felt alert, like a living thing holding its breath. Conversations ended when she entered a room. Guards avoided meeting her eyes. Even the air seemed heavier, thick with unspoken calculations. She stayed close to Vincent, not because he ordered it, but because instinct told her distance was no longer safe. That afternoon, Vincent summoned a man he had not seen in years. Morrison arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed, his smile polite and practiced. Vincent heard the faint unevenness in his breathing the moment he stepped inside the office. He heard the strain beneath the calm greeting, the subtle hitch that betrayed long-held fear. They spoke of nothing at first. Weather, time, familiar names from a past that felt distant now. Vincent allowed the doctor to relax, just enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was level, almost gentle. You examined me for 23 years, Vincent said. Did you ever doubt your diagnosis? The question landed softly, but the silence that followed screamed. Doctor, Morrison laughed nervously. Vincent heard the falseness of it immediately. Medicine evolves, the man said. At the time, Vincent repeated. You were paid to be certain. The doctor swallowed. Vincent heard it. The truth unraveled quickly after that, not in confession, but in fragments financial records hidden behind routine billing, referrals that never happened, tests that were skipped because no one insisted they be done. Vincent listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his hands folded calmly on the desk. And then came the final piece. It wasn't my idea, Doctor, Morrison said, voice breaking. Your father, he believed it was safer this way. For you, for the family. He said a man who couldn't hear couldn't be manipulated through sound. He paid me to make sure you believed it was permanent. The room seemed to contract around them. Vincent felt the words not as sound, but as impact. His father's voice, remembered only through sight and gesture, echoed now in meaning, if not tone. Protection disguised as control. Love twisted into strategy. How much, Vincent asked quietly. Doctor... Morrison hesitated. Enough. Vincent stood. That movement alone was enough to end the conversation. Guards appeared without being summoned, their footsteps measured and final. Doctor... Morrison's protests faded into the distance, swallowed by the corridors he had once walked freely. When Vincent was alone again, he did not sit. He stared out at the city, listening to its constant pulse, its indifferent noise. The truth hurt more than the silence ever had. He had not been broken. He had been made this way. Shaped. Contained. Maria entered without knocking. She took one look at his face and knew. It was intentional. She said, yes. The word carried decades of betrayal. She approached slowly, stopping just within arm's reach. I'm sorry, she said, though she had done nothing wrong. Vincent turned to her then, his eyes dark, his expression stripped of every mask. You gave me back something they took, he said, and in doing so, you took something from me. She did not retreat. What my illusions? The admission was raw, dangerous. Vincent was not a man who spoke like this, yet the sound of her breathing, steady and present, anchored him in a way nothing else could. That night, the reckoning began. It was not dramatic. There were no explosions, no public displays of violence. Instead, men were removed quietly from positions of influence. Accounts were frozen. Alliances dissolved without explanation. One by one, those who had known, those who had benefited, those who had stayed silent when silence was profitable, disappeared from Vincent's world. Blood was spilled, but not indiscriminately. Maria did not ask what he was doing. She knew better. She heard it in the way his footsteps changed, in the tone of his voice when he issued orders, in the way the house exhaled as though relieved. Vincent Torino was not lashing out. He was correcting a system. And yet, something in him was unraveling. Later, in the quiet hours before dawn, Vincent sat beside her on the terrace, the city below glowing with borrowed light. He had removed his jacket, his posture less rigid than usual. Maria watched him carefully, hearing the fatigue he refused to name. They chose for you, she said gently. Your father. The doctor. Everyone who took the money and said nothing. Vincent nodded. They decided who I would become. And now, she asked. He considered the question, the sound of it lingering between them. Now I decide, he said. Maria reached for his hand. The contact was brief, tentative, but it sent a shock through him stronger than any noise had. He turned his hand, their fingers interlacing instinctively. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single connection, the warmth of her skin, the quiet rhythm of shared breath, the fragile promise of something neither of them had planned. This is dangerous, Vincent said softly. Yes, Maria replied. But so was telling you the truth. He almost smiled. As the sun rose, casting pale light across the city, Vincent understood the final cost of what had been taken from him. Silence had protected him, but it had also isolated him. Sound had exposed him, but it had also let him hear, to the one person who stood beside him without fear or agenda. The truth had been bought with blood. And now that Vincent Torino could hear it, there would be no escaping its consequences for anyone. The city reacted before the rumors had names. Vincent Torino felt it in the subtle reordering of sound conversations lowering when he entered a room. Footsteps changing pace in corridors that once echoed with careless confidence. Power had shifted, not loudly, not chaotically. It moved the way pressure did, silently redistributing until something gave. Maria sensed it too, though she would never have described it in those terms. To her, the mansion felt colder, not hostile alert, like a place that had learned it was no longer safe to breathe freely. She stood at the window of the room beside Vincent's, watching the lights flicker across the city. When she finally spoke the thought she had been holding back for days. This won't stop, she said. Vincent did not ask what she meant. He was seated at the small table behind her, reviewing reports he had already memorized, listening not to the words but to the way they had been delivered. The lies had become easier to spot, the loyalty harder to trust. No, he agreed. It won't. She turned to face him, Then you have to let me go. The sentence cut cleanly, sharper than anger. Vincent lifted his gaze slowly. That isn't an option. Maria did not flinch. It's the only one that makes sense. Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. Vincent rose from his chair and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. Up close, he could hear her heart racing, the quickened rhythm betraying the calm she tried to project. She was afraid not of him, but of what staying would mean. They won't stop testing you, she continued. And as long as I'm here, they'll keep using me to measure how far you're willing to go. Vincent exhaled slowly. She was right. That was what made this unbearable. You are not leverage, he said quietly. In their eyes, I am, Maria replied. And in yours, I might be more. The honesty left him momentarily disarmed. For years, Vincent had been feared because he never hesitated. Decisions were calculations, outcomes inevitable. But this was different. This was not territory or money or revenge. This was a person who had stepped into his life without asking permission and changed it beyond recognition. You think leaving will keep you safe, he said. I think staying will make you choose things you can't undo. She answered. The words echoed too close to truth. That night, Vincent did something he had never done before. He asked for advice. Marco arrived after midnight, summoned quietly, his presence announced by footsteps Vincent knew too well. This time, Vincent listened with full attention, catching the slight unevenness in Marco's breathing as he entered, the carefully neutral tone that no longer fooled him. You're changing, Marco said, after Vincent explained nothing and everything at once. People are noticing. And Vincent asked, and change invites challenge, Marco replied, especially when it looks like attachment. Vincent's jaw tightened. Say what you mean. Marco hesitated. Vincent heard it. If she stays, someone will try to hurt her, not because they want her gone, but because they want to see how you react. Vincent dismissed him without another word. The answer had been exactly what he expected. That did not make it easier to accept. Before dawn, Vincent made arrangements. They were meticulous, quiet, final. Maria was to leave the city within hours, escorted under a name that was not hers, to a place that did not exist on any of his maps. She would be protected, watched from a distance, untouched by the war he knew was coming. No messages, no contact, safety demanded disappearance. When he told her, she stared at him in disbelief. You're sending me away, she said. I'm keeping you alive. Her voice broke despite her effort to contain it. You don't get to decide that alone. Vincent stepped closer. I do, he said softly. This is the one choice I won't compromise on. Tears gathered in her eyes, unshed. And what about what I want? He closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the sound of her breath, the tremor she could no longer hide. What you want, he said, is the reason you must leave. The words devastated them both. The departure was swift, no farewells witnessed, no explanations given. Vincent stood in the shadowed corridor as Maria walked away, her footsteps measured, controlled, each one echoing too loudly in his chest. She did not look back. If she had, she might have stayed, and he would have let her. When the doors closed, the mansion exhaled. Vincent returned to his office alone. The city sounded different without her nearby, harsher, more mechanical. Sound no longer overwhelmed him, but it no longer softened either. Within hours, the consequences arrived. A shipment intercepted, a trusted lieutenant exposed, a deal undone before it could be completed. Vincent moved through the retaliation with ruthless efficiency, his orders precise, his reactions instantaneous. Without Maria's presence, there was nothing left to protect, only balance to restore. And yet, every victory tasted hollow. By nightfall, the city burned quietly, not in flames, but in fear. Messages were sent, lines were redrawn. Vincent Torino reminded the world who he was without raising his voice once. He stood on the terrace long after midnight, listening to the distant sirens and muted chaos below. Power had returned to its familiar shape, sharp, unquestioned, absolute. It should have been enough. Instead, all he could hear was the absence of one sound, Maria's voice. He had chosen as a king would, sacrificing the personal for the survival of the crown. It was the decision expected of him, the decision that had kept him alive all these years. But as the night stretched on, Vincent Torino understood the cruelest truth of all. Some choices protected the empire. Others destroyed the man who ruled it. And for the first time since he had found his hearing, Vincent wondered which loss would prove more fatal. Silence came back to Vincent Torino in a way he had never known before. It was no longer the absence of sound. The city still roared beneath his windows. Engines snarled, sirens wailed, voices collided in endless friction. But the silence that settled inside him was heavier than the one he had lived with for 37 years. That silence had been imposed. This one was chosen, and it accused him every moment he breathed. Without Maria, sound lost its warmth. Her voice had been the first sound that did not demand anything from him. Now, every noise felt transactional again, weighted with expectation, fear, or ambition. The mansion adjusted quickly to her absence. Staff resumed their careful distances. Guards returned to familiar routines. The house became efficient, obedient, empty. Vincent became lethal. He moved through his days with flawless precision, dismantling opposition before it could gather form. Men who had tested him vanished from positions of power. Accounts were seized, alliances fractured, and secrets long buried surfaced at exactly the wrong time for those who believed themselves untouchable. Vincent did not rush. He did not overreach. Sound had sharpened his instincts, and silence sharpened his resolve. Yet every night, he listened for a sound that never came. He caught himself pausing outside the room beside his own, aware of its emptiness. No steady breathing through the wall. No soft movements in the early hours, just absence, echoing louder than any threat. 3 weeks passed, then the city shifted again. Vincent noticed it first in the tone of urgency threaded through his calls, not fear anticipation. Someone was moving carefully, deliberately, beyond his immediate reach. Whispers reached him through channels he controlled too well for coincidence. A woman traveling under a false name, a route altered at the last moment, an escort reassigned without authorization. Maria. The realization struck him with cold clarity. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat accelerating, steady but unrelenting. He had protected her by erasing her from his world. Or so he had believed. But erasure created shadows, and shadows were where enemies thrived. Vincent summoned his head of security without raising his voice. He listened as the man spoke, noting the tightening cadence, the careful choice of words. Something had gone wrong. She changed plans, the man admitted, insisted on leaving the route early, said she felt watched. Watched. Vincent felt a familiar, unwelcome sensation coil in his chest. Fear not for himself, but for the woman who had trusted him enough to walk away. Where is she now? Vincent asked. The pause was barely perceptible. We don't know. The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent ended the call and stood very still. Sound receded, replaced by a focused quiet so complete it felt like a weapon. This was the moment he had tried to prevent, the cost of choice revealing itself in full. Within minutes, the city responded. Vincent's network activated in overlapping layers, each one feeding him information through channels designed for speed, not comfort. He listened to voices from docks and airstrips, from hotels and transit hubs, filtering truth from panic, threat from misdirection. The city spoke, and Vincent understood it better than ever. Maria had not run from him. She had run toward something. He found her trail in a place that surprised him at a small medical clinic near the edge of the city, one that specialized in outreach care. Her name appeared in a quiet request for records. Nothing overt, nothing that would have alarmed anyone but him. Maria had been asking questions. About him. About his childhood. About doctors who had worked under false diagnoses. She had not left to escape the danger. She had left to confront it. The knowledge struck him with equal parts awe and fury. She is not safe, Vincent said into the phone, already moving, and she does not understand what she's walking into. By the time he reached the clinic, night had fallen. Vincent did not bring guards. He moved alone, slipping through streets that knew his name even if they did not recognize his face. Inside, the clinic was dim, the air heavy with antiseptic and fatigue. He heard Maria before he saw her, her voice low, controlled, speaking to an elderly nurse whose tone carried a nervous edge. Maria turned at the sound of his footsteps. For a fraction of a second, relief flickered across her face before she masked it with frustration. "You weren't supposed to find me," she said. Vincent stopped a few feet away, taking her in. She looked tired, determined, unharmed for now. "I always find what matters," he replied. Her jaw tightened. "I didn't leave to be rescued." "I know," he said. "That's why you're in danger." The nurse excused herself quickly, sensing the gravity in the air. When they were alone, Maria faced him fully, her voice steady but charged. "You sent me away to protect me, but the truth doesn't disappear just because I do. Someone else is still covering it up." Vincent heard the conviction in her voice. The same conviction that had brought her to his office weeks ago. The same conviction that had changed his life. "You should have trusted me," he said quietly. "I did," she answered. "That's why I came back." The words landed between them, intimate and devastating. Outside, a car door slammed. Too close, too deliberate. Vincent's head snapped toward the sound as Maria stiffened. He heard the telltale rhythm of approaching footsteps, measured and confident. Not law enforcement, not allies. "You were followed," Vincent said. Maria's eyes widened, then hardened. "Then let's stop running." Vincent took her hand without hesitation, pulling her toward the back exit. The contact grounded him instantly, the sound of her breath beside him anchoring the chaos. As they slipped into the alley, shadows closing in, Vincent understood the truth he had been avoiding. Sending her away had not protected her. It had only delayed the inevitable. As footsteps echoed behind them and the city closed ranks, Vincent Torino made a silent vow not as a king or a strategist, but as a man who had finally learned what it meant to hear. This time, he would not choose the Empire over her. Whatever followed, whatever it cost, he would face it with her beside him. And in the darkness of the alley, with danger drawing closer, silence returned not as refuge, but as the breath before war. They did not run far. Vincent felt the city tighten around them as they moved through the alley, the echo of footsteps behind them, measured and deliberate. These were not amateurs. He heard discipline in their pace, confidence in the way they closed distance without haste. Someone had planned this. Someone had been waiting for Maria to step into the open. Vincent pulled her into the shadow of a loading bay, just as a car rolled slowly past the mouth of the alley. The engine idled too smoothly. The doors did not open. Whoever sat inside believed patience would do the work for them. Maria's fingers tightened around his sleeve. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No," Vincent said quietly. "This is mine." He listened, not just to the street, but to the pattern beneath it. 2 men on foot, one in the car, another presence farther back, pretending not to exist. The trap was designed to force a mistake to make him choose speed over precision. Vincent Torino had never survived by choosing poorly. He guided Maria through a narrow service corridor, emerging into a back street where noise from a nearby market masked their movement. Voices overlapped. Vendors shouted prices. Music bled from open doors. Sound became camouflage. Vincent adjusted instantly, weaving them into the crowd, his grip steady, his breathing controlled. They did not stop until they reached a building that looked abandoned but was not. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. Vincent sealed the door behind them, engaging measures that did not exist on any blueprint. Maria leaned against the wall, catching her breath, her eyes searching his face. "You knew this would happen," she said. "I knew it might," Vincent replied. "That's why it ends tonight." She studied him, reading the finality in his tone. "Ends how?" He met her gaze without evasion. "By removing the last reason anyone believes they can use you to reach me." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they stilled her. "You're talking about stepping away," she said. Yes. The admission felt heavier than any confession he had ever made. Vincent had built his life on dominance, on command, on the certainty that control equaled survival. Stepping away from the Empire was not retreat. It was annihilation of the man the world feared. And the city Maria asked? "Your people, they will survive," he said. "They always do." What he did not say was that he would not survive another choice like the one he had already made. Hours later, the city felt the shift. Vincent did not announce it. He never would. Instead, power flowed outward from him in a single, decisive motion. Orders were issued that could not be undone. Assets were transferred. Authority redistributed with surgical precision. Names were elevated. Others erased not through violence, but through irrelevance. The Empire did not collapse. It stabilized. Those who had waited for weakness found none. Those who had plotted against him realized too late that the game had changed. Vincent Torino was not being dethroned. He was leaving on his own terms. By dawn, the men who had followed Maria understood their mistake. They never reached the building. Vincent listened to the final report without reaction, then ended the call and turned toward the window. The city looked the same in the pale morning light, but it no longer belonged to him. For the first time, that truth did not feel like loss. Maria stood a few steps behind him, silent. "You don't have to do this," she said. Vincent turned to her slowly. "I already have." She searched his face, seeing the resolve there, the exhaustion beneath it, the quiet certainty of a man who had finally stopped running from himself. "What happens now?" she asked. He stepped closer, close enough to hear her breath, to feel the tension ease from his own chest. "Now," he said, "we choose something that isn't built on fear." The words trembled with meaning. Vincent reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with intention. Maria did not hesitate. Her fingers slid into his, warm and real, anchoring him in a world that no longer demanded he be a king to deserve it. "I sent you away once," he said softly. "I won't do it again." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "I didn't come back to be protected," she said. "I came back because I chose you." The confession struck deeper than any threat ever had. Vincent closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of the city-waking cars starting, doors opening, voices rising into a new day. He heard it all, but for the first time, none of it felt overwhelming. The noise no longer controlled him. When he opened his eyes, the future was no longer a calculation. It was a decision. They left the building together as the sun climbed higher, walking not as fugitives or rulers, but as two people stepping into uncertainty side by side. The city watched without understanding, unaware that the man who had once owned it had finally let it go. Behind them, the war ended quietly. Ahead of them, something fragile and unguarded waited to begin. And Vincent Torino, who had spent a lifetime learning how to survive in silence and power, finally understood what sound had been trying to teach him all along. Love was not a weakness. It was the only choice that had ever truly been his. The city learned to live without Vincent Torino faster than anyone expected. There were no headlines announcing his disappearance, no public collapse of power, no visible chaos to satisfy those who had waited decades for his fall. The empire he had built did not burn it dissolved, redistributed into quieter hands, governed by men who understood that survival now depended on stability, not fear. Vincent had designed it that way. If he was going to leave, he would leave nothing behind that could chase him, for the first time in his life. Vincent woke to a morning that did not demand anything from him. The house was small, set on the edge of a coastal town where the air smelled of salt and wood instead of metal and smoke. Waves moved in slow, patient rhythms, their sound gentle enough not to overwhelm, steady enough to ground him. He lay still for a moment, listening not to threats, not to strategy, but to the quiet music of a place that did not know his name. Beside him, Maria slept. Her breathing was soft and even, a sound he had come to recognize as safety. In the months since they had left the city, Vincent had learned the cadence of her presence, the way she shifted slightly before waking, the way her breath changed when she dreamed, the faint sound she made when she smiled in her sleep. These were the sounds he chose to keep. He turned carefully, watching her as morning light traced the lines of her face. There were no shadows of fear there now, no tension held beneath the skin. The woman who had once stood in his office trembling with courage now slept with the unguarded peace of someone who no longer felt hunted. Vincent reached out, brushing his thumb lightly along her hand. Maria stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw him, she smiled not cautiously, not tentatively, but with the quiet certainty of belonging. "You're awake," she murmured. "I didn't want to miss the morning," he said. She laughed softly, the sound still startling him sometimes, with how effortlessly it softened his chest. "You used to rule a city before sunrise." "I ruled silence," Vincent replied. "This is better." They rose together, moving through the house with a familiarity that still surprised him. He had spent his life commanding spaces designed to intimidate. Now he learned the intimacy of shared routines. Coffee prepared side by side, windows opened to let in the sea air, the unspoken negotiation of space that came with choosing to live together rather than merely coexist. Outside, the town moved slowly. Fishermen prepared their boats, shopkeepers lifted shutters. Children ran past laughing, their voices bright and unafraid. Vincent listened to it all, no longer flinching, no longer searching for threat beneath every sound. Maria watched him from the doorway. "You're listening again," she said. "I never stopped," he replied. "I just stopped translating everything into danger." She crossed the room, resting her hand against his chest. He felt her heartbeat through her palm, steady and warm. "Do you miss it?" she asked gently. Vincent considered the question honestly. Power had once defined him. Silence had protected him. Fear had obeyed him. But all of that felt distant now, like a life lived by someone else. "No," he said. "I miss who I thought I had to be." Maria tilted her head. "And who are you now?" Vincent took her hand, intertwining their fingers. The gesture no longer felt fragile. It felt certain. "Someone who chooses," he said. Later that afternoon, They walked along the shoreline, the tide low, the sand cool beneath their feet. Vincent listened to the gulls overhead, to the water curling around rocks, to Maria's voice as she spoke of small things of the clinic she had begun volunteering at, of the people who didn't know his past and didn't need to. He listened not because he had to, but because he wanted to. They stopped near the water's edge, the horizon wide and open before them. "I was afraid once," Vincent said quietly. Maria turned toward him. "Of losing everything." "Yes," he said. "And then I learned that losing everything was the only way to keep what mattered." She reached for him, resting her forehead against his. "You didn't lose everything," she said. "You found something else." Vincent smiled, the expression still new enough to surprise him. He had lived a lifetime without sound, and another drowning in it. Only now did he understand the balance between the two, the space where meaning lived. As the sun began to set, casting gold across the water, Vincent felt a calm he had never known. The future was uncertain. It always would be. But it was no longer something to be controlled at all costs. It was something to be shared. That night, as the town settled into quiet, Vincent lay beside Maria, listening to the steady rhythm of the world outside and the softer rhythm beside him. The silence that surrounded them was not empty. It was full of trust, of choice, of a life reclaimed from the shadows. For the first time, Vincent Torino did not measure time by power gained or enemies lost. He measured it by moments like this, by sound that did not hurt, by silence that did not imprison, by love that asked nothing but honesty. And in that quiet, unguarded space, Vincent finally understood what home sounded like. It sounded like her.